Max. I opened my 5 eyes and looked up at the green night sky. It was pouring down with rain, beating down onto me. Everything hurt. Everything ached, and in places I could feel the rain hitting my raw flesh where my skin had been burnt away. A face hovered over mine, and it took a few seconds for my eyes to focus. A Juperian face was staring back at me, worried. "Are you okay?" he asked in English, and I realized who it was. It was Tyler, as a Juperian. He looked so handsome in my race's form. Not that he didn't before. "Max?" Tyler asked again, leaning over me more so that our faces were level. I grabbed his face with both hands and pulled it down to mine, kissing him on the lips. At his touch, I felt my body recharging and fixing itself. Once again, Tyler has saved my life in the pouring rain with only a kiss. I sat up and looked at him, running my fingers over his face. "I didn't recognize you at first," I said, flicking my wet hair off my face. He smirked. "Am I sexy?" he asked, screwing his face up. I laughed, so happy right now, and kissed him again. "Come inside before you catch a cold, you two," I heard my mom call, and looked to the back door to my house. Tyler was looking at my legs, and I glanced down too, watching my skin stitch back over the muscles. "You scared me half to death, you moron!" Tyler cried and shoved me back down, smashing his lips back to mine. I chuckled. Who cares about the rain, right? I hugged him so tightly to me. I couldn't believe this was happening. He was here, on my planet, with my parents. I was going to show him everything. "So how did you get back anyway?" Tyler asked me, eating at Uyo, as we walked down one of the city streets. I'd never had to describe my hometown to an outsider before, and it was a strange concept. It was so unlike the cities back on Earth that were so dead and man-made. While our cities and towns were like nests of vines and trees with homes built into them by our ancestors, we were the ant race that lived in colonies, to put it simply, and our technology grew in the plants as one, no pollution or waste. I was walking beside Tyler looking at myself in a small hand mirror. I hadn't had a chance to see what my new adult form looked like yet. Not bad, though I'd hoped it'd be a little taller. At least as tall as my dad at 8'6". But no, I was only 8'2". Oh well. I'd have to get used to that. At least I was taller than Tyler like this. He was only 7'11". I'm not sure. I remember blowing myself up and flying out into space. Then I grabbed onto a ship or something that had been blown out with me. It seemed to work all right. So I flew it over here. But the systems were bad, so I couldn't shield it, and the Juperian board fleet shot me down. I must have landed not far out and crawled back, I explained idly as I poked my cheek. Tyler didn't speak, and in his Juperian form I couldn't sense what he was thinking, but I think I had an idea. He was worried about me. So, to comfort him, I grabbed his free hand and took it in mine. He smiled, but didn't look over at me. "I can't believe this place," he breathed, looking around with that astonished look I'd seen on him all day. That look made me grin. Right then, a low-flying sub flew over us, and the wind whipped at our clothes. The ground was for people, and the sky was for riders. Flying over us was a buzz of Juperians on their subs, coming and going about their business, the bees of the sky. "Can we go on one of those?" Tyler asked, pointing to a tower that stretched up to a platform level with the flyers. Docked to it were 3 empty subs. They were free for use because no one owns the subs. You just use it when you need it, then drop it off at a dock for someone else when you're done. Easy. "Sure, but I'm driving." I grinned and ran to the stairs, Tyler close behind. Tyler. Max sat on the front of the sub, but I thought it looked more like a jet ski than anything. I climbed on behind him and placed my arms around his waist to hold on tight. There were no helmets or seatbelts or anything. At this height, I was seriously concerned about falling off, but I trusted Max. "Ready?" he asked. He seemed more excited about this than me. "Yup." I nodded, popping the P and looking around. The sub jerked a little and then streamed off through the air. It was fantastic. The wind whipping at your hair. It was like being on a motorbike, but instead of just going left and right, you could go up and down, roll over, pinwheel, and spiral. It was the best feeling in the world, but I knew driving it would be even better. Max drove us around the city, and when walking around, it had taken us all day. The setting sun casting red beams through the gas cloud now. On this sub, it took minutes. It was incredible. We pulled up at a different sub port thing, one closer to Max's house, and hopped off. Is it alright to just leave it here? I asked as we descended down the stairs built into the huge trunk supporting the platform. Of course, Max chuckled and stopped. I frowned as he grabbed my hand and pulled me slowly towards him as he leaned his back against the wall of the tree. He pulled me against his chest and smiled, brushing a piece of my hair behind my ear. I'm so glad you're here, he breathed, and I smiled. I'm so glad you're alive. I laughed and chuckled too. I'm never going to leave you, he pointed out, and I nodded. Ditto. I laughed and leaned against him. He felt the same, even though both of us were in Juperian form and not human like I was used to. At first, I thought it'd be weird, but it wasn't. Regardless of what he looked like or how many limbs he had, he was still my Max. Max cupped my jaw and lifted my face to his. I stared into his eyes as he leaned forward and closed his, pressing his lips to mine. His Juperian lips were bigger, and I liked it. More mouth to kiss. He kissed me slowly and softly. It made my whole body tingle. The way this body reacted to things he did were different to how it did as a human. The spots on my cheeks began to tingle, and my eyes glowed brighter. My pants felt uncomfortable again. Ugh, I breathed, pulling away slowly, staying close in his arms. I was surprised how breathless I was just from that. He chuckled and kissed me again. It's getting late. We should head back, he said, then took my hand and led me away. Max. My dad grumbled, folding his forearms across his chest. All right, bedtime, Mom called, coming into the room. She seemed to sense the tension from Dad and wanted to end it before it blew out of control. Dad and I got into a heated discussion over the Juperian board all the time, and fairly easily. It's because we both hated them. No, Mom, I told her, watching as she walked around the table. Yes, Max Tajuk, Mom replied calmly and sweetly. No, Mom, I said and then laughed. Tyler glanced at me, and I smiled to him. I was so happy to have him here in my house, with my family, disguised as one of us. It was crazy. I wanted to jump around the building, dancing around and screaming. Tyler, would you like to go to bed? Mom asked my boyfriend, turning to him. He looked back at her and smiled. Definitely. He laughed, then smirked back at me. I scowled. Tyler rose and headed off to the elevator platform. He waved as he went up and disappeared. Go on, Dad chuckled, nodding towards the ceiling. I bit my lip and thought about it. 5, 4, 3, 2. I got up and ran to the lift, jumping on it before it reached the ground again, and it rose up through the ceiling. I didn't get off it in the forest, and I rose up to the 3rd floor. It opened up to a small hallway with 3 doors, 2 on the right, 1 on the left. The 2 on the right led to my parents' room and the upstairs toilet. The left, which was open, led to my room. I walked over to it and stepped into the doorframe, looking inside. The top level of the house was more advanced and less jungle-like, because it was built on by my parents before I was born, out of an old ship, being all natural metals. The rest of the treehouse had accepted it. Tyler was standing there looking around my room. My floating bed was on the left. My drawers and cupboards, racks and clothes were on the right. There was a window next to my bed, and in the middle of the floor was a rug like a target, but in red and yellow. What are you looking for? I asked Tyler, and even though I spoke softly, he jumped and whirled around. Nothing, he mumbled, looking back at my bed. It was what humans would call queen size, but it actually would only fit just me now I had grown. I'll have to get Mom and Dad to buy a bigger one. I scratched my chin. That's gonna be a problem. Unless... I turned and closed my door, then opened the keypad on the side and tapped away at the keys. What are you doing? Tyler asked. But instead of answering, I hit enter, and the doors, walls, and windows sealed shut tight. A vent opened above the door and made a hissing sound, oxygenating the room. I turned to Tyler and pressed the stud in my ear. My body shuddered and shifted to human, and now I stood before him, 1 foot and 11 inches shorter than him. He reached up and pressed his earring, then shrunk back to his normal human self. But why? he asked me, frowning. He looked cute when he frowned. I nodded towards my bed. So we can both fit, I laughed, going over to it and grabbing a spare pillow from under the windowsill. I fluffed the pillow and threw it onto the bed, then looked back up to Tyler, who was standing there, eyes wide. I smirked and pressed a button on the wall by my bed, plunging us into darkness. I could see if I looked out the window into the sky, the satellite floating just inside the atmosphere. It had 2 flashing lights, one green and one blue. It hovered around Jupiter, sending signals to all the houses and vehicles. Together? In the same bed? Tyler whispered somewhere in the dark. I was human again, so I couldn't see him properly. He stood as just a dark shape in the middle of the room. I crawled up onto my bed and over to the end, then knelt there and held out my hand to him. The whites from his eyes dropped to my hand, and he paused, then took it, and I pulled him onto the bed with me. Don't tell me after all we've been through you're afraid to sleep beside me in a bed? I purred, holding him close to me as we laid down, our heads on the same pillow. The spare one was behind me somewhere. No, it's just, Tyler muttered, and I kissed his forehead. I know, I breathed, brushing his fluffy hair off his forehead. He pressed a hand on my stomach and sent butterflies through me, but I liked it. I love you, I told him for the second time, and was content just laying there beside him. I didn't want to sleep, so that I could spend as much time here with him as possible before the morning came to take him away. Tyler. I love you, Max said, and a shudder ran through me. I never thought hearing those words would affect me so much, but coming from him, it made me feel like a girl in some weird online sappy romance story. Ugh. Now, if it was some sort of strange alien sci-fi, on the other hand... Are you really going to leave me hanging? Max chuckled, rolling over so he was on top of me. One of his knees was between my legs, and I couldn't help but notice. I bit my lip. He was so close, I'd forgotten what we were talking about. I could feel his body heat coming down over me like a wave. The whole room smelt like him. He smelt like him, ironically enough. And it was a smell like nothing I'd smelt before. The most delicious smell in the universe. I would have said world, but... It's okay, Max laughed, leaning in a little closer and interrupting my thoughts. He pressed his lips to mine. I felt uncomfortable, no longer with his lips pressed to mine, and I eagerly reached my arms up and wrapped them around his torso. My elbows were resting against his ribs, right over where his second arms had been. It was funny coming back to human. I'd just been getting used to having 4 arms and 4 legs. My vision seemed very minimal after having 5 eyes. Max kissed me deeply, slow but passionate, and I kissed him back just the same. I wanted him to know how much I really did care about him, even though this situation was kind of interspecies. Doing it with a werewolf is bestiality. Doing it with a vampire is necrophilia. What was doing it with an alien? I guess no one's yet to categorize that. If I'm the first, then I should call it terrestriality. I laughed, making Max pull up and raise his eyebrows. What? He asked, and I just laughed. Nothing. Don't worry. I was just thinking that this is terrestriality, I said, raising up onto my elbows. Max bit his lip and thought about it. I guess you're right. He laughed and kissed me again. Then he paused and pulled back once more. Unless that's a bad thing? He asked, unsure. I shook my head and smiled. No, not at all. I laughed and grabbed his face with both hands. Definitely not. And then I brought his face to mine and planted a wet one right on his face. In that case, Max chuckled and rolled, pulling me on top of him. I groaned, collapsing limp onto him and pretending to be asleep. He wriggled to shake me, but I was dead weight, and he laughed. Tyler, he chuckled, trying to tickle my sides, but I'm not ticklish. Good night. I pretended to yawn, still sleeping. Max sighed and relaxed out, hugging me and pulling the covers up. Night, babe, he breathed, and I grinned. Can I just stay like this forever, please? Marco. I'm gonna kill him, Neil said, bursting through the front door to my house. I stepped back to let him in, and he stormed down the hall. I closed the door and followed into the kitchen. I was so glad my parents were away for the night, visiting my sick great aunt. What happened? I asked, taking up a stool beside my boyfriend around the kitchen island. He's gone. I got home and the house was trashed. He's even broken his bedroom window, and now he's gone. He's not even answering his phone. Neil growled, rubbing his face with his hands. He seemed less like an adult like this. I reached out and grabbed his hand. Maybe it's just a phase, I offered, and Neil cracked a smile. If it is, you better not do it too, he joked, and then sighed, turning to me and resting his head on my shoulder. I went around and checked his house. I pretended to be grabbing something for him, but his parents haven't seen him or heard from him. I didn't want to say anything and make them worry. Vienna and I haven't seen him since school, I thought, biting my lip and staring off into space in thought. And Gunner's been with Sarah all afternoon. It's that new kid. The new one, Max. He's dragging Tyler into all kinds of trouble, isn't he? Encouraging him to do bad things. They're probably together getting into trouble right now. Blowing things up or something. Neil groaned into my neck. I pressed my lips to the skin of his shoulder because he was wearing a tank. No, it can't be. Max is awesome. He's not like that at all. He's the goody two-shoes in the group. I tried to defend, but honestly, I wasn't sure. I didn't even know what Max was like outside of school, and I'd only heard stuff about him through Tyler. He never really gives me much attention at school. Why is it you don't sound so sure? Neil laughed and wrapped his arms around my waist. Eesh, I can't handle this whole being a parent thing just yet. I'm not ready for kids, let alone hormonal teenagers, and here I am dating one. Hey, I pouted, but Neil chuckled and hugged me tighter. Hurry up and graduate, Neil ordered me. I can't make it go any faster, unless you can control all time and space like a Time Lord, I told him, and he smirked. Perhaps not, but when that boy gets home, I'm still gonna kill him. Neil. I'll murder him until he's dead, I shouted, storming around my apartment. All night I've stayed up waiting for him to get home, expecting him to get in late like he did last time with some lame-ass excuse. Nope, that didn't happen. He hasn't come home yet. I'm going insane. That boy is going to make me prematurely old and weary. I'm getting gray hairs of stress here. If he doesn't show tonight, I'm telling his parents. Relax. He's a grown boy, Marco cooed from the couch, patting it beside him. I wanted to go sit on the couch with him, but I couldn't relax. I'd grown attached to him more than usual now. I felt bad for getting angry, guilty that maybe something has happened to him, which only made me angrier. I'm calling his parents, I cried and grabbed the phone, punching in the numbers. It rang and then was picked up. Hey, bro, I have to tell you something, I said down the line. You need sleep, you need to eat, Marco told me, trying to shove a muesli bar in my face. I shoved it away. I felt like shit, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tyler laying in a gutter somewhere, lifeless and broken. The idea of food just made me feel sick. My anger had faded in the early hours of the morning today. About the time the sun had begun to rise on a new day, I'd begun to hope that he was out causing trouble rather than hurt. But most of all, I just wanted him home. Police came and went, going back and forth between his parents and mine, and Marco crashed here in my bed most of the time, but nothing had changed. Maybe it was that guy who broke into our house, Wendy piped up suddenly from her husband's arms. Don't say that, I snapped. But it could be. That criminal broke into Tyler's room, Wendy noted aloud, voice cracking with hysteria. Her husband held her tighter. Shh, don't think about that, he soothed her. Marco didn't soothe me when my brother and his wife were over, especially when the cops were around, but that's the way it had to be. I hung my head in my hands and shook it. Damn, that boy better be all right, or hell, I'm gonna break loose. Any more of this waiting and not knowing, and I was gonna lose it. If he's dead, I'm gonna kill him.